Ash Hollow wasn't on most maps. Just a forgotten patch of rural land tucked between dry hills and rustling pine forests, where fog rolled in thick and low every morning like a blanket trying to hide something. Folks passed through but rarely stayed, except for her. Clara Bell lived alone at the edge of town, in a creaking two-story farmhouse at the end of a gravel path. Most just called her the widow, a title that clung to her like dust since her husband, Elias, vanished 3 years ago under circumstances that nobody liked to talk about. He went hunting one evening and never came back. No body, no explanation, just gone. Some said Clara never grieved. She didn't wear black, didn't cry in public, didn't even put up missing posters. She just returned to the farm, closed the gate, and carried on. That silence unnerved people, so they whispered about curses, about old secrets buried in the soil, about the land, because the land, after all, was what made Clara different. Ash Hollow was mostly worthless rock and brush, but Clara's 20 acres had water, a spring that never dried, soil that grew anything you put in it, a chunk of paradise surrounded by dust. Developers had come sniffing before, men in slick suits and shiny boots, but Clara had said no every time. Then, a week before the story really began, a letter arrived. It wasn't addressed in handwriting, just a typed envelope with no return address, stamped and delivered like any other. Clara opened it over her morning tea, not expecting anything more than bills. It read, "You have 14 days to vacate the property. The land is not yours, it never was. We're coming to reclaim what belongs to us." No signature, no explanation, just a crude drawing at the bottom, 3 intersecting lines in a triangular shape, like an arrowhead, or a brand. Clara didn't panic. She folded the letter neatly, and placed it in the drawer next to her stove, beside a revolver her husband once cleaned every Sunday. She didn't call the police. She didn't tell the neighbors. Instead, she went outside and walked the edge of her land. She hadn't done that in months. The perimeter fence was intact, though rust was beginning to bloom on the wires. The spring still bubbled under the old willow tree. The scarecrow Elias had built stood limp in the cornfield, its flannel shirt faded to gray. All was quiet, but as the sun dipped below the hills, a sound echoed through the valley, low hum, mechanical and out of place. Clara turned toward the tree line. Headlights blinked through the trees. A dark SUV, moving slow, watching. She stood her ground. The SUV didn't stop. It passed by on the logging road, then disappeared into the shadows, leaving a trail of dust and unease. That night, Clara locked her doors for the first time in years. She dreamed of Elias's boots, heavy on the floorboards, his voice calling from the woods. But when she woke, all she heard was the wind. 3 days passed. Then came the second letter. It was pinned to her door with a rusted nail. "This is your final warning. The land holds what we need. Step aside, or be buried with it." Clara read it twice. Her hands didn't tremble. She went to the barn, lifted a floorboard in the back stall, and pulled out a small, metal lockbox. Inside were 3 things: a faded map, a photograph, and a DI signed in Elias's hand. She stared at the photo. It was old, black and white, and cracked at the corners. Elias stood beside 2 men she didn't recognize. All 3 wore the same triangular symbol on their coats. Below the photo, scrawled in ink, "It's not just land, it's the key." She didn't know what it meant yet, but she would, and soon, so would they. By the 4th morning, the fog hung heavier than usual over Ash Hollow. It clung to the ground like a secret, trying to stay hidden. Clara stood on the porch with her coffee, watching the mist curl around the cornrows like fingers. She didn't like it, not because it was fog, but because it was quiet. Too quiet. No birds, no bugs. Even the old windmill wasn't creaking. The silence felt wrong, unnatural, as though the land itself was holding its breath. She went back inside, pulled the map from the lockbox, and unfolded it on the kitchen table. The paper crackled with age. It didn't match any local survey. No highways or county lines. Instead, it was filled with odd symbols, hand-drawn borders, and old names, some scratched out, some circled in red dot, and in the center, right where her land would be, was that same triangular mark from the letters. 3 intersecting lines, pointing inward. A warning, or a seal, maybe both. A knock at the door snapped her out of the moment. She slid the map away, tucked the revolver into her cardigan pocket, and answered it slowly. 2 men in gray suits stood on the porch. Not the kind from the city, with polished smiles. And fake kindness. These were different. Hard eyes, pale skin, matching pins on their lapels, small triangles, black on black. Mrs. Bell, the taller one, said, "We'd like a moment of your time." Clara didn't move. "Who are you with?" "An interested party," the second replied. "Let's just say we represent those with ancestral rights to this land. Rights that predate your husband's claim." She smirked. "You should have sent a lawyer, not a threat." The taller man smiled thinly. "That was your final warning. You're standing on something that doesn't belong to you." Clara's hand brushed the grip of the revolver in her pocket. "Then you're trespassing." "Not yet," he said, glancing out toward the barn. But soon, the two men turned and left without another word, disappearing into the fog like they'd been swallowed by it. No car, no sound, just gone. Clara closed the door and bolted it. Then she went to the basement. Elias never let her down there much, said it was where he kept things best forgotten. But the lock had rusted years ago, and now it broke with a simple twist of a screwdriver. The air was cold and dry. Dust hung like powder in the shaft of light from the open door. Tools lined the walls. Canning jars, old books, and a trapdoor in the floor. It had no handle, just 3 metal grooves and a triangle. Clara froze. She didn't remember ever seeing that before. The basement hadn't been this quiet when Elias was alive. He used to come down here late, at night, sometimes staying until dawn. She assumed it was hunting gear, reloading ammo, maybe building something, but now, staring at that shape embedded in the concrete, she knew he'd been hiding something. She ran her fingers along the grooves, cold, smooth, worn from use. Something unlocked beneath her hand. The trapdoor clicked open a fraction of an inch, enough to show her that it wasn't wood underneath, but steel. She didn't open it further. Not yet. Instead, she brought the map back down and laid it on the cement. The triangle on the map aligned perfectly with the trapdoor's outline. Whatever they were looking for, it was here. That night, she heard them again. Outside, rustling in the field. Flashlights dancing just out of reach. She didn't go to the window. She just sat by the stove with her revolver in her lap and the lockbox at her feet. They weren't afraid of her, but they were afraid of something buried, or sealed. And they didn't want her to open it, which meant she would. The fog didn't lift the next day. It thickened, turning the fields into a shapeless sea of gray. Clara moved through it like a ghost, a rifle slung across her back, the revolver still at her hip. The weight of the map in her coat pocket felt heavier than iron. She hadn't touched the trapdoor again. Not yet. Not until she understood what might be underneath. Just after noon. A sound cut through the fog, a sharp crack, like a branch breaking, then silence. Then another. Clara froze by the chicken coop, eyes locked on the edge of the trees. Something moved. Not fast, but steady. A shape formed in the mist, a silhouette she didn't recognize. A man stepped out from the tree line. Weathered face, dust-colored duster, old hat pulled low over one eye. He walked with a limp, favoring his right leg, and carried a long walking stick that looked more ceremonial than practical. Etched into its surface 3 faint lines intersecting in a triangle. Clara gripped the rifle tighter. He stopped about 20 yards away and raised one hand. "I mean no harm, ma'am. Just figured it's time someone told you the truth." Clara studied him. "You with the men in the suits?" He gave a low, tired laugh. "Not hardly. I've spent the last 15 years trying to stay out of their reach. What do they want?" He looked around, like the trees themselves might be listening. "Same thing they've always wanted. Control, power. And what's under your land is older and more dangerous than they could ever understand. You're going to have to be more specific than that." He took a slow step forward. "Let's just say it's not just a spring that makes your soil so rich. This place sits on something ancient. Buried, sealed. A gate, some say. Others call it a tether. Doesn't matter. It's a piece of something that was never supposed to be uncovered." Clara narrowed her eyes. "And my husband knew about it." The man nodded slowly. "Elias was one of us. A keeper. It was his job to make sure nobody ever found it." "Then why the map? Why the trapdoor?" The stranger took off his hat, running a hand through his gray hair. "Because he knew the others were coming. He left signs in case he didn't make it. In case you had to carry on." Clara stepped back. "I'm not a keeper. I'm a farmer. I just want them off my land. You can't unearth the past without consequences. The minute you opened that box, they knew. They felt it." "Felt what?" He looked her dead in the eye. "The lock weakening. The seal shifting. That trapdoor isn't just metal, it's a lid. And underneath it is something that hungers for the world it once knew. Clara's stomach turned cold. Then help me seal it. The man hesitated. I can try. But it may already be too late. The others, what's left of the order, they're not interested in protecting it anymore. They want to use it. For what? For rewriting the world. Before Clara could respond, a sound split the air, a low-frequency pulse, like a drumbeat in her bones. Both of them turned toward the barn. Smoke, black and unnatural, curled from beneath the floorboards. Not fire, not steam, something darker. Like shadow, made liquid. Clara's voice dropped. It's waking up. The stranger looked grave. Then we have to move. Tonight. He pulled something from his coat pocket, an old key, made of bone, carved with that same triangular sigil. This opens the next layer, he said, but once we go down there, there's no going back. Clara took the key. It felt warm in her palm. Alive. I'm not afraid, she whispered. Good, he said. Because fear's what it feeds on. Together, they walked toward the barn, as the fog rolled in behind them, sealing the world off in silence once again. Beneath their feet, something ancient stirred. The night air was thick, damp, and full of secrets. Clara's breath came out in small clouds as she followed the man, the keeper, as he'd called himself, through the tall cornstalks toward the barn. The pale moonlight filtered through the fog, casting long shadows that seemed to twitch like living things. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. But she didn't dare look away. Not now. The barn's ancient wood groaned underfoot as they entered. The strange smoke had stopped, but the air felt heavy, as if the darkness itself was watching. The man pulled out the bone key again and knelt beside the trapdoor. The 3 intersecting grooves on its surface seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. Clara leaned closer, her hand resting near the revolver. Are you sure about this? He nodded solemnly. Once the seal weakens, we have to keep it from breaking. With a slow, deliberate motion, he slid the key into one of the grooves and turned. A grinding sound filled the barn as the trapdoor shifted, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Clara swallowed hard and gripped the railing, feeling the cold bite of stone beneath her fingers as she descended. The air grew colder, heavier, like stepping into another world. At the bottom, their flashlights cut through the blackness. The walls were carved stone, ancient and worn. Symbols, like the ones on the map, covered the surfaces: triangles, circles, lines intersecting in strange patterns. This is it, the keeper whispered. The vault. Ahead, a large door stood, sealed with iron bands and the same triangular lock. The man produced a small pouch and scattered a handful of fine powder over the seal. The air shimmered briefly, then the lock clicked open. The door creaked inward, revealing a chamber filled with nothing, except for the ground, a patch of dirt, oddly darker than the rest. Look closer, the keeper said. Clara knelt and brushed the soil aside, revealing a circular stone slab beneath. It was covered in the same symbol, worn smooth by time. Suddenly, a soft glow began emanating from the slab, faint at first, then growing stronger. The walls hummed with power. Clara stepped back, heart pounding. What is this place? A prison, he said grimly. For something that should never be freed. A sudden noise echoed behind them, footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. There, here, the keeper warned. The door slammed shut at the top of the stairs. Clara's hand went to her revolver, but it was useless down here. The shadows in the corners began to move, and something ancient, hungry, was waking. The heavy door slammed shut with a deafening finality, cutting off the faint light from above. Clara's breath hitched as she spun around, her eyes straining to pierce the thick darkness that now surrounded them. The cold air in the chamber felt alive, vibrating with something unseen. The keeper's flashlight flickered, casting long, jittering shadows against the stone walls. But these shadows weren't just simple shapes. They moved of their own accord, stretching and writhing like living things. Stay close, the keeper whispered, his voice tight with urgency. Clara nodded, her fingers tightening around the revolver she had drawn instinctively, though she knew it was useless here. Gunpowder and bullets felt trivial compared to whatever ancient force lurked beneath her farm. From the far corner of the chamber, a low rumble began, like the earth itself was awakening from a deep slumber. The glowing symbol on the stone slab pulsed in time with the sound, casting an eerie blue light that danced across the walls. Do you feel that? The keeper asked. It's a heartbeat, not of a creature, but of something much bigger. Suddenly, from the darkness, tendrils of shadows snaked across the floor, coiling and writhing like serpents. Clara's heart pounded as the shadows reached toward her feet. "Step back," the keeper commanded, stepping between Clara and the advancing darkness. The shadows recoiled at his presence, but the glow from the slab intensified, pulsing faster. "They're feeding off the seals, weakening," he explained. "If we don't reinforce it, this whole place could become a gateway, a path for whatever's trapped down here to escape." Clara scanned the room desperately. Her eyes landed on an ancient altar carved into the wall, covered with glyphs similar to those on the map. Scattered on it were fragments of old bones, twisted metal, and a cracked crystal that pulsed faintly. "Can that help?" she asked. The keeper nodded. "That crystal's a keystone. It's tied to the seal, a focus point for its power." Clara moved cautiously toward the altar, ignoring the shadows that writhed near her feet. She reached for the crystal, feeling a strange warmth radiate from it, as if it responded to her touch. The moment she lifted it, the shadows shrieked in protest, retreating back into the darkest corners. "Good," the keeper said. Taking the crystal and placing it carefully on the stone slab, the glowing symbol flared, and a wave of light surged through the chamber, pushing back the darkness. For a moment, the vault was silent again. Then, from somewhere deeper within the earth, a distant roar echoed, primal, furious, and alive. Clara's blood ran cold. "That was no warning," the keeper said grimly. "That was a promise." The echo of that distant roar lingered in the air like a thunderclap, shaking the very bones of the vault. Clara swallowed hard, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down on her. The air was still thick with tension, as if the shadows themselves held their breath, waiting. The keeper stepped forward, eyes sharp but heavy with exhaustion. "The Order wants to use what's beneath this land to rewrite the world, to bend reality to their will." Clara's mind raced. But why? What power could possibly be buried under a farm? The man's gaze darkened. "Because it's not just power. It's a tether, a link between worlds. If broken, it could unleash forces beyond our control." Clara looked down at the stone slab, its symbol still glowing faintly beneath the crystal. Elias knew this. That's why he was a keeper, guarding the seal, protecting the world from what lies beneath. Her fingers traced the edge of the slab. And suddenly a vision flooded her mind, a shadowy landscape, twisted and broken, where monstrous shapes writhed beneath a dark sky. She saw men in dark suits, the same symbol branded on their coats, prying open gates, tearing at the earth. She gasped and pulled back. The keeper put a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're more connected to this than you realize. Elias chose you for a reason." Clara shook her head, disbelief mixing with fear. "I'm just a widow. A farmer. I don't belong in this world." "You do now. The seal is weakening because of the letters, the threats, and because you've been here." A sudden sound from above startled them. A metallic clang echoed through the stairs. The door had been tampered with. "They're coming," Clara said, steeling herself. "We have to reinforce the seal. The crystal keeps the gateway closed, but it needs more." The keeper reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather-bound book. Inside were instructions, written in an ancient language mixed with sketches and symbols. "We need to perform the binding," he said. "An old ritual to strengthen the seal." Clara nodded, determination settling in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt like she had a purpose. Together they gathered the relics scattered around the chamber, bone fragments, twisted metal, and pieces of old parchment. As they began the ritual, Clara's voice wavered, but grew stronger. The symbols on the walls shimmered in response, glowing brighter with each word spoken. Outside, the fog thickened, and distant voices murmured through the trees. Time was running out. Suddenly, the ground trembled violently beneath them. The seal was fighting back. The chamber shook violently as Clara and the keeper chanted the final words of the binding. The glowing symbols on the walls pulsed wildly, casting flickering light that danced like flames. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the air thickened, crackling, with raw energy from the depths beneath the stone slab. A low growl rumbled, a sound like the earth itself was angry and alive. The keeper's voice strained. "Almost there. Keep going, Clara." She matched his chant, voice rising with fierce determination. Her eyes locked on the glowing crystal, which now blazed like a star. The shadows in the corners writhed and screamed, clawing at the walls as if desperate to break free. Suddenly, the heavy door at the top of the stairs burst open with a thunderous crash. The two men in gray suits stormed down the steps, their faces twisted with rage. The triangular pins on their coats gleamed coldly in the eerie light. "You can't stop this," the taller one snarled, drawing a dark dagger etched with ancient runes. Clara raised her revolver not to shoot, but as a symbol of defiance. The keeper stood beside her, holding an ancient staff that hummed with power. The men advanced, but as they stepped into the chamber, the light from the crystal flared, creating a barrier of shimmering energy. Back, the keeper warned. The seal is active. One of the men lunged toward Clara, but invisible forces slammed him into the wall, knocking the wind out of him. The other pressed forward, eyes wild. You'll regret this. Clara's voice was steady. You're the ones who will regret trying to unleash what's buried here. With a final surge of power, the crystal pulsed, sending waves of light through the chamber. The shadows screamed and writhed, then shrank back into the cracks of the earth. The ground stilled. The roar faded. The men, defeated and exhausted, slumped to their knees. Clara lowered her revolver and looked around the chamber. The seal held. The keeper exhaled deeply. For now, she looked at the lockbox from her kitchen, now resting on the stone slab. It was more than just land, more than a farm. It was a gateway, a burden, a legacy. Clara squared her shoulders. She was no longer just a widow. She was a guardian. As dawn broke over Ash Hollow, the fog lifted for the first time in days, revealing a world that was safe but fragile, and Clarabelle was ready to protect it, no matter the cost.